Hey writers, welcome back to the Write in the Head podcast with me, John Paul Sperling. I'm a screenwriter and a life coach. So this podcast is where we bring those two worlds together, talking about the mindset required to turn that passionate pursuit of writing into a thriving career. Cole Goslee and Chase Anderson, welcome to the first ever three-person Write in the Head podcast. You did it.
All right. I love it.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Very excited to talk to you both. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. It's funny because every episode I make a note of what the theme of the episode should be, and it's normally something quite extravagant and quite clickbaity because YouTube. And the theme I wrote down for this one is just getting shit done. That's it. Just that. I cannot wait because I think it's one of those messages that, of course, we've heard it before, but I don't think you can ever hear it too much because honestly, I think action is, well, you know what? I'm not going to give you my opinion on action because it's your episode and I want to dive in and ask you several questions because you are the kind of people that have just taken that approach. You've got stuff done, you've had an idea, you've sort of jumped in and made it happen. My opening question, which I thought of as a bit of a curveball, because I like to try and trip my guests up a little bit, is do you think that trait of being action focused, do you think you can teach that to people?
It's a great question.
Thanks. I thought so.
Yeah,
I think
I think you can. But it all starts with motivation, and that's the component that you can't teach because it comes from within. But you can give them the know-how and the tools to get, shit done, as you said. And teach them about motivation. But you can't give them motivation. So it's a yes and no sort of approach on my end.
the only thing I'd add to that is that I think so much of my motivation, my sort of actionable quality comes from my childhood. And I have to assume that I learned that simply through discipline and, being required to do the little things every day over and over and over. So I think it can be learned, it can be taught. But yeah, I'd fall back on Chase's answer. How badly do you want it, right? Like that's ultimately going to underscore it all.
Yeah, it's the whole, I can't make you want something. I
Exactly.
can give you the best motivational speeches, or in my case, probably send you to somebody else who's much better at doing that kind of thing. But yeah, if there isn't that fire, the fire in the belly, that I have found, even as a coach, I have found that incredibly hard to teach. Now, what I have done is spent a lot of time focusing on where are people's levers? Where can we find the drive? And it's funny about sort of how honest you have to get with people or how honest they have to get with you. Like, why do you want this thing? And don't lie. Don't tell me an answer that you think I want to hear or that society at large would want to hear, but what's your actual answer? I always remember the days of being a personal trainer and asking people why they wanted to, for example, lose weight. It's a common goal. And if they would say longevity and health, I would say, okay, cool. Why do you really want to lose weight to the point that you won't have pizza tomorrow night? And eventually we'd have to get down to they wanted to look good naked or something like that. That's real talk. That's what's actually going to make you take the action. So I've sort of derailed us there. I apologize, but it just came to mind when you were saying that, and I think you're absolutely right. You have to want the thing in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you think people struggle with that then? Why do you think people don't want things enough or don't take that sort of action first approach?
Well, I think people are really good at wanting things that, you know, I think that's sort of the issue is they may be too busy wanting something and don't know how to achieve it. And My approach has always been just start somewhere, whether that's big or small. Just start doing the one thing that gets you to your goal. Yeah, Cole, I know you had something to say to add to that as well.
I just think it's a daunting ask of yourself, to step out of your comfort zone and pursue whatever it is that you want. Um, because I think as humans, we have a natural tendency to put obstacles in front of ourselves and decide, oh, it's too much, it's too hard. Um, how am I going to accomplish this thing all on my own? Where do I even start? That's kind of the biggest hurdle, I think, is people have this idea of what they want to accomplish, but picking up the firing gun and shooting it yourself is really challenging, especially if you're not someone who has been challenged before in so many ways. If you've been fortunate enough to live somewhat of a comfortable life, um, then taking those steps toward doing something new, stepping outside of your comfort zone is just really difficult.
We will get back to the chat in just a moment. Firstly, if you're enjoying today's episode, please do go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That's a great zero-cost way of supporting the Right in the Head mission. It takes you about 2 seconds to click that button. If you want to go the extra mile, write us a comment as well. That will tickle the fancy of the YouTube algorithm, meaning this content shows up for more screenwriters just like me and you. Thank you so much. Back to the chat. So what can we do about that? I'm so much I get so excited when other people share their opinions on sort of tactical stuff. Like, so it's overwhelming. There's that sort of fear of going into the unknown. What have you guys learned on your journey so far when it comes down to that actual moment of deciding yes or no, take action or don't? What actually helps you to answer in the positive and to just take a shot?
Yeah, I would have to start by saying start with low risk actions. Go into whatever endeavor you're sort of stepping into. In our case, it was podcasting, right? And start small. Make your goals at the very beginning sort of like bite-size obtainable tasks and write them down. Have them out in front of you and write them out so you can sort of start to materialize those and create a little checkbox next to them and sort of check them off. And do that and sort of build that list as sort of tasks that you can complete in one day. And then once you're finished there, do your next day. And then soon you're starting to materialize maybe a weekly task list. But you have to start somewhere, and starting off small is the way to grow big.
Mm.
I'm an avid fan of lists. Just writing everything out and putting it in front of you. So it has this physical space outside of you, outside of your own thoughts. It lives somewhere. You can see it materialize, all of these successes. So simply just echoing Chase, but what I would add to that is find ways to celebrate those little wins too, no matter what it is, the low risk tasks. If you check one of those boxes off, give yourself 5 minutes to read a book or watch a YouTube video or something. But again, I think it falls back on discipline. You got to make sure that after those 5 minutes, you're right back to the next one. But I think if you can train yourself to get the sense that there's something good at the end of this, all this hard work I'm going to put in, I'm going to get something good out of it. It becomes much easier over time.
Yeah, yeah, both of those answers resonate with me a great deal. So breaking things down into bite-sized chunks has been so important, um, both for me and the people that I've worked with in the past as a coach, as a mentor. I think it's sort of that process of what's the vision, and then let's reverse engineer all the way down to the smallest possible steps that we can just take today. And no more than 3 to 5 of those per day. So it's not overwhelming. And it feels like we didn't really move the needle much today. But if you can do that consistently over time, then you will find that it compounds. It's like investing $1 a day. It seems like nothing. But with compound interest over time, suddenly you're a very wealthy person.
Yeah.
Well,
And I'm
well,
someone that,
not suddenly. That's the wrong word to use. But you will eventually become a wealthy person.
yeah. I also, so sort of my routine for anyone who's interested is when I get up in the morning, I get up relatively early. I journal first, reflect on the day before. What are some of those wins, some of those losses? Um, and then I write out all of my to-dos for the day under that. And sometimes throughout the day, I'm adding more. And the goal is never to check them all off, as great as that is when I do. Um, the goal is to keep moving. So if I do get to that point where I check them all off, it's thinking like, okay, what else can I do? How much can I fit in? Or if I don't get them all done, oh, great, I have something to look forward to tomorrow.
Mm, yeah. And are you trusting your own instinct on when enough is enough? So if you reach a certain time of day, is that your clock off kind of thing? Or is it more based on how your body's feeling, what's going on in your mind? Because I think people, I'll say people like us, because I assume you have a similar mindset. That can also be a separate challenge, can't it? Just knowing when enough is enough for today, the rest of it can be done tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's something that over time you learn to predict, what all you can get done, what you can accomplish. I know how fast and or slow I work, given what the task is. If it's a writing task, something creative, I need to give myself far more time than I would to do something physical, like some chore around the house. I need to sit, and I need to be comfortable in silence. And so I always give more time for things like that. But that was something that I had to learn over a period of time. Um,
Yeah, for me, I think it's sort of over time you develop sort of a sense of relief at some point in the day where you've accomplished enough, whether it's low hanging fruit or something much more grand. Um, but I typically work till 5 p.m. and if I haven't accomplished enough, I'll feel it in sort of my soul, and so I'll keep pursuing whatever I was doing that day until sort of my physical body and my mental health is telling me to quit. And that's sort of been my approach. It works for me, and I think that's the key is finding something that works for you and yields productivity, right? Because not everybody's going to operate the same way um in that capacity.
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
boundaries are really important, and that's what Chase is sort of pointing at as well. Setting boundaries for yourself, getting to the end of a day, whatever that means to you, and being able to throw your hands up and say, "That's it, I'm done. I can do no more," and not killing yourself because burnout's very real.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Oh yeah.
and you don't want to burn out in your own personal life with your own personal projects. Those are the things that um, you should relish working on, as hard as they may be.
Well, we're in this for the long haul, aren't we? It's an industry that demands a number of years of consistent effort. And so if you're burning out, then that's not going to be an effective strategy. I mean, it can work for short bursts, short periods of time, not burnout per se, but we've all had those moments of phases of time where we know we've pushed harder than usual.
Yeah.
And it can lead to great things. As a marketing guy, I've built funnels in a day and launched products the next day and made boatloads of money for other people. So it can happen and it can be fun to do those kind of sprints. But typically, that's when that project has a finite sort of deadline. You do it and it's over. What I've learned from stepping into this world of screenwriting is there's no finish line. It's an ongoing project to learn the craft, to learn the industry, to meet the right people. It's just, it will never end. So there's not really much point in trying to sprint the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I do want to talk to you about your podcast because, as the action takers that you are, you could have gone in many, many different directions. And I know you have a diverse range of skills between the two of you. So, what was it that led you to do the scripted drama podcast? And forgive me if that's not the best way of describing it, but that's, for me, it's a scripted drama podcast. What was
Yeah.
it that led you down that path?
Well, I sort of started dipping my toes into podcasting back in 2020 when we all had a little bit more time on our hands during the pandemic. And, you know, going back to sort of the getting shit done factor, I had this like grand idea of doing this conversational podcast and I wanted everything to be just right. And at some point I decided, you know what, I just need to start somewhere. And that time is now. And so I just hit the record button, threw up a couple mics with my brother, and we just started talking. And through there and through reiteration and some long talks and different strategies, we were able to sort of build sort of a foundational podcast that really kind of kicked off the production company that I fell into shortly after, and really connections with people like Cole and his sort of ambitions in Hollywood got us really thinking about audio dramas and how to create this sort of notion of television for your ears. Cole is also a fan of podcasts, and so we sort of kindled our sort of camaraderie over the medium, and said, "Hey, well, I've got this idea for this scripted podcast, and you're a writer, you're ambitious. Would you want to team up and sort of collaborate on this project?" And so that was sort of the genesis of that project, and that's called Original Kin. That's our sort of piloted audio drama. And then we got into another show. And what, Cole, do you want to sort of dive into how we got into Don't Write Me Off, the other show we have?
Yeah, I'm gonna step back quickly and just say I think it's worth noting, how this relationship even came to be between Chase and I. So we've known each other for 11 years at this point, something like that, 11, 12 years. And, for as long as we've known, there's just been a mutual respect for one another in regards to being self-starters, being guys who, set their minds to a task and see it through. Chase has a totally different set of skills than I do. I think the word that I would use to best sum him up is carpenter, not because he just builds bars and can build rooms in a house, but he builds, right? Like he is a man who uses tools to create things. I am someone who, I'm more of the conceptual guy, but I'm also like words on a page guy. So I have these ideas and I can go to Chase, and together we build the entirety of it, right? So with Don't Write Me Off, I also think it's worth noting that in 2020, me, like every other screenwriter in Hollywood, was sort of thinking to ourselves, what are we going to do? The whole world is shutting down. I had just moved out to LA 2 years prior, and was really struggling to find work. I got fortunate, or was fortunate to get a job right at the beginning of 2020, the week the world shut down. So that I had that to carry me through, but I'm at home and I'm spinning my wheels because I'm like, I've got nothing to do. And no one's looking for new writers right now. No one's making anything. Everything's shut down. So when Chase reached out to me about doing a podcast together, I was like, of course, like, why not? I've got all this time on my hands. And it was just something else that I could fit into my schedule and fill out the day, right? I will say, like, as the world seemed to be getting back to normal, I was like, okay, now do I hit the brakes? Do I hit the gas? Do we keep going with this? And I think it's just proven time and time again. I mean, we're doing this because of it to be more of a benefit to me than anything else I've done. Anything I've done to pursue screenwriting, at least for now. And I love working with Chase because, like I said, we bring two different strengths to our projects, and we're both so committed to seeing it through to the end. So anyways, Don't Write Me Off started because I wanted to give other writers that I cared about, writers that I knew, an opportunity to make something like we had made something with Original Ken. We have a friend, Russell, who he was doing sort of like a fun competition with his friends. None of them are really writers, but they all wanted to be a part of a writing competition. They told us about it. And I had done some screenwriting competitions. And just in thinking about those and his pitch for this competition with his friends, I was like, why aren't we taking something like that? The model of having people write something and compete against one another. Why isn't anyone doing anything with it beyond the page? Why doesn't that live somewhere? So I had this idea to do Don't Write Me Off, where we bring in writers who were struggling to find work, writers who were struggling to get things made, and we would make it for them. And the competition would just be the fun aspect of it. It would invite the audience in, which is also a new element that I haven't seen with other podcasts, other shows, really. I mean, game shows on TV, but in the podcast space, there's not a lot of fan audience engagement in this same way. So I wanted to offer that to our listeners as well. And so, yeah, we just, it became a grassroots project where everyone would just commit time and everyone would get something out of it. That was the idea.
Yeah. And I think you know, what a lot of people don't see behind the scenes is, you know, we're two hardworking guys that have day jobs. And so everything that we do outside of that is sort of dedicated to the podcast realm. And that's really tough. It's really tough because the one thing that we learned along the way was this is a labor of love. It takes a lot of sweat equity, a lot of our time. You know, that's like 2 to 3 hours a day, you know, 6 days a week, call it, and really getting this off the ground. And one of the things that really helped us along the way was being able to make decisions quickly. And I think that's a fundamental root of actually, you know, back to the topic of the talk today is getting shit done. It's the velocity of which you are making decisions. And without that, you're sort of spending weeks trying to decide what direction to go and somewhere. And back to the day one of Lucky Broadcasting was, let's just turn the mics on and see where it goes, and we'll make it better along the way. So
Yeah.
it's part of the journey.
Right, you take the action, you see how it goes, you get feedback from the world, and you iterate. It's so much more effective and efficient than continuing to. Well, let me ask you this. A lot of writers, myself included, do sometimes struggle with this, which is knowing when something is ready to just dive in versus when it is appropriate to continue to ideate and theorize. Do you guys have a good sense of that between the two of you? Is there one of you who's better at being the judge of that? Because I sometimes feel like I need a professional partner to tell me sometimes when I'm overthinking things and it's time to take action, or when something isn't quite baked yet and it does need a bit more attention before diving in.
I'm the type of guy that will just say something without filtering anything. And a lot of times I'll sort of have pause and be like, I know what I just said was really dumb, but maybe there's something there. And Cole's sort of my guiding light. He's my compass onto if an idea sort of has substance or not. And I think that's the key really, is to have or surround yourself with people who you trust. There's a lot of speed that comes out of that, is just having and working with people who you trust, because then the bandwidth and interface of which you guys operate, it just can move really quickly.
Yeah, and for me, I think we have checks and balances. We there are other people within our circle, particularly for Original Kin, because that's the one that we're creating, we're writing. We did table reads, we asked questions, we prodded our friends and family. But going forth, as we've been breaking the rest of this season series, there've just been exhausting conversations about everything. And I think in part as a creator who is self-producing, you have to accept it's not going to be perfect. You have to accept that as long as you like it, then it's good, right? Like then as long as you're satisfied with the story, with the beats, there are going to be some bumps and bruises. You're going to listen back and you're going to go, man, I wish I had done this instead of that. But I think as long as you're having fun and you're thinking to yourself, I would listen to this, I would watch this, that's what really matters in that space. And there was something that was said earlier that triggered this thought that you don't get that opportunity in TV and film. There's too much money on the line, first of all. But it's very rare to become someone who gets to just go and make mistakes, right? Or put the story that you want to tell on screen without a lot of oversight. We take it upon ourselves to find that oversight, Chase and I, but in the other space, in the screenwriting space, that's not just something that's given to you.
Mhm. Yeah, very, very true. I want to ask you about the journey so far for the two of you going into this podcasting realm, just bearing in mind that, the audience here are screenwriters. What are the key takeaways that you've taken from this journey, doing this style podcast, working with screenwriters? What have you learned so far about screenwriters in general? What are the things that you think they would be interested in hearing more about from working with you, from doing this sort of short form? Is it classed as short form content? What would you want to share with the audience here?
Yeah, it's definitely short form. I mean, our episodes are no more than 20, 21 minutes a piece. That was the model from the jump. It was like we needed to be able to, as two people who have full-time jobs, create this in a relatively quick way. I mean, it still takes us about 9 months between writing, the writers writing their scripts, and then us going through the recording and post-production process to then release. What I've learned from writers, it's challenging for a lot of them to adopt a new way of thinking. I often tell many of the writers that we've used, or who have been on our show, you need to hear your scene instead of seeing it. We all have this instinct to put a scene up on screen and describe it that way, but you need to stop and close your eyes and try to pick it apart audibly. I think that's just a new muscle that we all have to adopt and exercise when we're working in this space. As far as other things that I've learned or taken away from working with screenwriters, that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure that there's something that I'm just not thinking of right now.
It's tough because, to what Cole was saying, our episodes are 20 minutes or less, and they're 20 pages or less. That's the sort of parameter of which we operate in. And there's a lot of speeding through scenes that I think require a bit more to really sort of grab the meaning and the theme. This harkens back to an episode I'm thinking of. I won't call it out necessarily because I don't want to offend any of the writers, but there's a moment where the main character is in one place and suddenly he's in another, and then suddenly now he's in another. Like, it's very rapid, the location of which we're carrying our characters. And in the visual medium, that works so well, or it can work well, because you could do a montage, or you could, visually you see they're in a different place. But in the audio space, you have to get really creative about the soundscape and being thoughtful about the sort of sounds that come from the space that your characters live in. And that sort of triggers sort of the creativity in the writer's mind of like, okay, well, am I choosing spaces to put my characters in that have distinct soundscapes? An office only has so much. I mean, you can have the printers whirling in the background, and you can have, sort of the coffee machine is whirling. But there's only so much you can do with that to really sort of make it interesting for the listener.
I think the something I would add to what we're talking about is ambition can get in your way. And what I mean is you had this idea for a grandiose story, full of all of these characters and great world building. A story can be just as effective with two characters in a room. And those are oftentimes the stories that I'm most drawn to, particularly if you're writing for a shorter medium or short form. But that idea translates no matter what you're writing for, if it's audio or if it's screen. How can you simplify it and get to the heart of the story that you're telling in the theme that you're exploring? I'm just a fan of anyone who can take away, strip off all of the fun little extra bells and whistles and actually just tell me the story.
Yeah. For example, the winner of season 1 of Don't Write Me Off, Shanton Williams, his episode was 4 characters at most, and the majority of that episode just takes place between two people talking to each other, having an interview. And so focusing on sort of the quality of the dialogue, that takes you a long way. There's other components to that episode that really kind of beef it up and punch it up and make it exciting. And there's sort of this, twist at the end, but it just goes to show you what you can do with so little.
Yeah, yeah. This is some really good advice here. I hope people are paying much attention and making notes as we go through this. I'm going to have to do the same. I'm going to watch this episode back and make some notes. I wanted to circle back to something. I just kind of thought of this. There's this sort of conundrum that we face when we take more action. By definition, we will run into more obstacles.
Hmm.
What does that, how has that been for you? Do you have certain ways of sort of addressing obstacles at large? Is there a sort of mindset you have going into that? Is it different depending on what the obstacle is? Because I assume people like yourselves, you take more action, you come up against more walls that you have to break through. It's part of the journey, of course, but how do you deal with that?
I mean, I think it helps that we support one another, uh, just emotionally. The Chase is going to come up against walls that I'm not necessarily going to come up against. For example, in post production, like he does a lot of he does all of the sound design, and a lot of times it's finding like the score, the music that's going to play in an episode, and that can be really grueling, really taxing work for him, because you want to strike the tone of it, right? You want to convey what the writer was meaning to convey tonally. Um, and so I can lend a hand and an ear and try to find music as however I'm hearing it. Not everyone obviously has that relationship to balance out all of the obstacles. But personally, when I'm coming up against an obstacle, I think the action that I often take, which I'm resistant to take every time, but the action that I eventually do take is sort of inaction. Like I step away from it all. I can spend 2 to 3 hours trying to think through a scene and why it's not working. Why if I'm working on an outline for Original Kin, our other show, and I'm just banging my head against the wall trying to figure out like what's the next beat? Why or why is this thing that we talked about really not working? What's the missing ingredient? If I push myself away from the desk, away from the computer, and I go on a walk for 15 minutes and I try to do nothing but just not think about it, when I come back, I feel like I'm recharged, I can I'm reset, and suddenly my brain is firing with all these new ideas. That's just one example.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
want to. Sorry, go
Cole
ahead.
put it. I was gonna say Cole put it beautifully. Just go do something else. That's the best advice I can give is push the thing away, go do something else, and the solution will come, I think, through pause, reflection, and maybe in doing something else, there's a solution that comes out of whatever else you're doing. But also remain flexible. Um, there's some obstacles that aren't movable, and so becoming flexible and allowing yourself to compromise, whether that's between Cole and I or with the writers, having that collaboration and trust too. Again, that's that big keyword here, trust, that everything's we all have the same goal. So getting across the finish line and being able to be flexible and make those decisions. We're all working towards the same thing. So yeah, that would be my approach.
I love that. Yeah, and I wanted to just kind of nerd out with you guys for a second about what we've just been talking about, because as somebody who's sort of studied the brain a bit as a hobbyist, I talk about this a lot. This sort of phenomenon where we stare at a problem and we don't get the solution until we walk away and do something else. And what's happening is we're spending our time sort of, we have to get to the point where it feels like we're banging our head against a wall, because what that's doing is identifying and telling the brain, this is important to me. But because we don't know the solution immediately, we enter into a sort of stress response. And when we're in stress response, we're not very creative at all, because it's either fight, flight, or freeze.
Hmm.
So unless this particular problem can be solved by punching it, running away from it, or freezing, which is not often the case with screenwriting, we're not really going to be able to solve that problem, but we are telling ourselves this is important, this needs my attention. So then what happens is when we take that walk, or we go to bed, or we take a nice warm shower, we allow ourselves to go back into that creative default mode network, which is more relaxed, and then we get ideas cranking, and the brain will naturally sort of gravitate towards that problem that we were just feeling that frustration with, because it wants to solve it. It's this wonderful, wonderful process. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of go into what's actually happening under the hood, because I find it so fascinating. And you described it wonderfully. So next time that happens, maybe you chaps can think, I know what's actually going on in my brain now. That's wonderful. Maybe you already knew that. I don't know.
No, it's great validation.
Yeah.
Yes, because
And that's what this podcast is all about. It's just validating other people.
yeah, exactly. Because it's easy to think to myself like, oh, I'm quitting on this thing by stepping away from it. And I think to accept that maybe that small defeat in the moment will earn you a great success moments later, a day later, a week later.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I
And the key part to it is you do need the 20 or so minutes of head banging frustration first. Otherwise, you haven't told yourself it's important enough.
right.
So if you just start to feel frustrated and walk away immediately, that's not really going to do you much good. So you need that frustration. It's That's the challenging part. But then I think you'll agree with me, when it's time to walk away.
Oh yeah.
You get the feeling, don't you?
Usually my wife tells me.
To walk away from her.
No, no, just walk away from whatever the problem is because I'm using choice words.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
When the air starts to turn blue, it's probably
yeah,
time to take a step outside. So
exactly.
the other question that comes up a lot, I get asked this one quite a lot because I'm, very action focused. In this industry in specific, it's actually, a mutual friend of ours, Alex Knight, asked me this question recently. How do you know that this action you're taking is actually leading you in the right direction? Because the industry this industry that we're in, and I'm saying that at large, I suppose, it's not known for having very clear pathways and being easy to track progress. So, what have you guys kind of put in place as sort of metrics to help you decide, yes, we're on the right path, or no, we probably need to pivot?
Yeah, I think I would be sorry if I didn't say there is a bit of risk involved. And making bold moves requires you to be a little bit uncomfortable with some of the decisions that you make creatively. Um, you can rely on things like comps, hey, am I in the right direction? Oh, well, they did this on this show. That seemed, or hey, this show has X amount of listeners and they're doing it this way. Hey, they're releasing on this day, so you can look to the industry to provide those answers to you, but the ugly answer is there's a lot of risk involved in creativity, and sometimes you just have to trust your gut, and if it feels right to you, going back to what Cole had said earlier, if you're happy with it, and and that's the gut is telling you, hey, that's the way you need to go, maybe that's the right choice.
Yeah, I think it's also about modulating what success means for each project, right? Um, and for yourself personally in your career. Um, when I first moved out to LA, I probably, like most people, thought 5 years I'd be in a writer's room. I've been out here for 6 years, haven't gotten into a writer's room yet. And that's okay because I'm doing this, which satisfies, the creative, it scratches the creative itch, if you will, in so many ways. And I think, well, I'd love to see my name on a big screen someday. Being able to put this out and have people respond, it was an overwhelming feeling of success and achievement when we put the pilot for Original Kin out, and some of our closest friends or family members were like, this is great, we can't wait for more. And of course we're sitting there sort of kicking ourselves because all we had was the one episode, but we really wanted to see what people thought of it. We were really eager to get it out there, and I think the goal at one point was put it out and see if we could get anyone interested in helping us move, get more of it made, so we'd have a bit of a return. And so that's what I mean when I say, like, modulating what success is. We didn't get that. So what is success to us now with this project? It's telling a story that we've grown to really care about and put characters, I want to say on screen, but in a place where you can listen and live with them and experience their journey. That's the next step of success for me, is just telling that story. So that, on one hand, I think, is an answer to your question. Otherwise, it's I don't know. It's always challenging yourself, and allowing yourself to be surprised at the same time. We got an overwhelming response to Don't Write Me Off the first season, at least overwhelming in the sense that we didn't expect the amount of people to show up who showed up. And so that sort of becomes your next metric, right? Can we meet that goal again? And can we add more listeners? And how do we do that? So that's the challenge now for us. And that will be the success or not when we get there.
Yeah. Yeah, modulating success. That's a keeper. I'm gonna note that one down. I like the way that you phrased that. Guys, any final thoughts here? Because we're about to switch up the flow of the conversation and do our question for a coach. Any final thoughts here on getting shit done? Anything that we should have talked about here that we didn't?
Don't don't squander don't squander a Sunday morning. And what I mean is just, like, get up before the rest of the world, get some shit done, and have the rest of the day ahead of you. Like, just if you can sit yourself down first thing and knock out what's most important to you, I think you only do yourself a service, a good service, by having one really great success at the beginning of your day.
Yeah. Celebrate the wins, no matter how large or how small, and take time off as a part of that celebration. When you get something done, turn it in, walk away, go to Cabo. I don't know, go outside, find some relief. That's what keeps me coming back is allowing some breathing room in between projects, and that's also a way we get inspired is doing other things other than your day-to-day main focuses, because without that, I think projects start to feel hollow, and lack the soul that it needs to be interesting and captivating for audiences.
And the last thing I'll say because I think it's especially important for this setting, this conversation, given we're the first two like creative partners on this podcast. There are a lot of people who pursue partnerships with people, and sometimes they stay in those partnerships longer than they should, um, because they feel like they need someone to sort of motivate them. But oftentimes, what I understand happens is, and I've had this happen too, to know one particular person's fault, someone else ends up carrying more of the weight than the other person. Don't stay in a relationship that isn't benefiting you creatively. That's what I get from Chase and what he gets from me. I mean, it's equal parts for the recipe that is everything that we create.
Don't stay in the relationship that's not helping you creatively. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to be, hopefully we can trim that to be a YouTube short, that last little section there. That was great. We'll have to see what Opus Clip spits out. I don't know if you guys use it, but I do.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very random sometimes. There's a lot of tweaking involved, but thank you very much. That was a great final answer, and so many tips here that I just hope listeners are sort of leaning in and thinking, where else can I take some solid action today? It doesn't need to be huge. I think we all agree on that. It's just doing it consistently over a long period of time, probably longer than you're expecting, but probably not as big and dramatic as you think you might have to be. It really, for me, it does come down to just those small steps repeatedly over time. It's not a sexy answer, but it does seem to be the way that people eventually break through.
Yep.
So we're going to switch it up now, do the question for a coach. You have emailed me the question in advance. It's one of my favorite questions to contemplate and hopefully spit out a decent answer. Do you have the question there? Would you want to read the question out for the listeners?
Oh, give me 1 second.
I have it right here. I can
Okay.
probably.
You can do it. I've been looking at you. I didn't have the email open.
It's okay. It happens all the time. The question that you posed, what does life coach John tell screenwriter John to keep him going? I think I paraphrased that, in an industry with limited opportunities. I love this question. When I read this, I smiled, and it came at such a great time because I've been doing my end of Q3 review. How is the year going so far? What goals did I set at the beginning of the year? How close am I to achieving those goals? So it did make me smile. The timing was extremely fortuitous. So the answer, I mean, I wanted to start with a sort of a caveat almost, that I don't allow myself to slip into that mindset of this is an industry with limited opportunities. So I know that's not the crux of the question, and I will give you an actual answer to how I motivate myself, keep myself going. But I did want to just add that because, like I said a moment ago, there's not so much a linear path here from beginning to end or from bottom to top of industry. But I've always kind of seen that as a good thing. If you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, which I do, it makes me think actually there's more ways that things could happen. Because if I'm in a sort of stodgy company with very traditional pathways to the top, there's nothing that I can really do to innovate around that. Whereas I think we're in an industry where, I mean, who knew that you could just start a podcast from your living room and start meeting other writers and start, booking influential guests. And, there's just, we live in this world now where so many things are possible. So I did just want to say, like, I think that's a big part of it for me. I don't allow myself to think of this industry as so much tougher than any other industry. I think of it as I've worked in a lot of different industries over the years, and none of them would allow a person to join at the entry level and become CEO in less than a decade, with very few exceptions. If you rule out things like nepotism. So is this industry any different, really? Because we're talking about reaching the top as writers, like being in that room, seeing your name on the big screen. So yes, it's going to take a long time. Anyway, let's just that concludes the caveat, which turned into more of a rant, and we'll now go on to the actual answer that I planned out here.
Can I
So,
challenge you on one thing and see
of
how you
course,
respond?
of course,
The only caveat I'd throw at your caveat is that I feel like
we're,
there are,
we're caveating
yes,
caveats here.
is that I think that there are few, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong, few industries like this industry that requires you to reintroduce yourself and your capabilities, your talents with every job that you take, right? If I'm working in the TV space, I do the run of a room, and then I am sort of at the beck and call of this great industry to get my next job, right? And of course, the more I do it, I'm going to climb that ladder. But getting to stay on that ladder, I think, is a challenge that not many industries present. Like to your point, if I walked into a company and there's a ladder in place that I start at the bottom and I'm going to stay at this place and move my way up. I think that it's harder to do in this industry, but I'd be curious to hear your response to that.
There's definitely an element of truth to that, and I've heard people say, Jason Bateman says this oftentimes. I listen to him talk on Smartless, and he'll talk about even at his level, he gets fired 3 or 4 times a year because whenever a project finishes, he's out of work again.
Yeah.
And I love the way that he describes it. I think it's such a funny way of thinking about it. But the thing is, to continue that example, to your point, at his level, it does become massively more easy to get the next job.
Right.
So I do agree with what you're saying. And yes, that is a quirk of this industry that not many other industries share. But it's also true to say that with any other industry, you can have a promotion and then you can have a demotion, or you could get promoted and then your business could go into liquidation. So
Sure.
there's rises and falls in any industry. So yes, this is a tough industry. I just think it's healthy to think of it as any industry I could go into would be very challenging because I'm talking about being in the top 5%.
Right.
So whichever one I pick, there are no easy industries.
There. I'll take that.
So the journey I've been on, this answer is going to be quite specific to me when it comes to what I tell myself to keep going in this industry because of everything that led up to me being where I am right now. So this might not be that useful for anybody else listening, but it is the truthful answer. It's been a journey of sort of pursuing a number of different things as I was when I was a youngster. So I dabbled with many different, what at the time I would have called them passions. So DJing was a big one, music production was a big one, acting was a big one, personal training and life coaching, of course, those were huge things. I've worked for several different startups, learned all about those industries for short periods of time. So struggling essentially to stick with anything because I would get bored easily and move on to the next, shiny object syndrome. I would just want to try the next thing. So I developed a bunch of skills, which was great, but gradually started to feel more and more like an imposter, like what's the word? Simulacra. Let's use a fancy word. Just a representation of a successful person rather than an actual successful person. And the reason that's relevant is because that experiencing those sort of vicissitudes, it became apparent to me that something needed to change. I was not enjoying being the jack of all trade, master of none. I think it's a fine life in your 20s. Absolutely, go out there and learn a whole bunch of things. But as you go into your 30s, and now I'm in my early 40s, it became obvious this was sort of a deleterious effect on my life. And I just had to make that decision. I need to pick something and just stick with it. And it is going to take way longer than I want it to. Like I said, I used to get excited and build marketing funnels in a weekend and launch a product. So when somebody says this is going to take you 10 years, like that breaks my brain entirely. But it was that journey of realizing that's actually what success looks like. That's actually how you don't feel like an imposter. That's actually how you get genuinely good at something, not just good enough to fake it among people who don't know what they're talking about, which used to be my specialty. So the reason I say all of this is because for me, I'm kind of now in this liminal space between, yes, I still want the worldly success because I'm driven and I'm ambitious, but I'm also determined to just stick with the thing I said I was going to do. I don't care what's going on with the industry collapsing around me. That came out wrong. Of course I care, but it's not the deciding factor on whether I continue to do this or not.
Right.
That is going to come down to, I said I'm going to continue to do this. I am going to continue to do this. I'm going to do the thing I said I was going to do. Because ultimately, I'm going to shift my position here because the sun is starting to creep into my eyes. Ultimately, that is what I now take pride in. That is my identity, is I'm not going to be that person that just gets distracted and switches paths again. I did that. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot guarantee myself any success in this industry. Nobody can. But what I can guarantee is the input that I give. So my goals now, these goals that I've just been reviewing because it's end of Q3, I do have output-based goals, but the ones I really focus on are effort-based goals. So how many hours of writing am I doing per day or per week? How many scripts am I finishing per year? How many networking events am I going to? How many higher level executives am I adding to my professional network per year? These are the things that I can actually track. These are metrics that I can actually measure. And no, I don't know that they will ever lead to success, but I know I can look back at the end of the year and say, I did those things that I said I was going to do. Maybe one day that leads to the name on the big screen, being in a writer's room, whatever the dream is. I don't know, but I take an immense amount of joy and fulfillment from just doing the thing that I said I was going to do. Guys, where can people go if they want to learn more about you, about the podcast that you have? What links can we include in the description for you?
Oh, absolutely. Luckybroadcasting.com is our sort of main index for all our shows. That's where you can find links to Original Kin, Don't Write Me Off, and our conversational podcast at The Lucky Duck. Or you can go for our Don't Write Me Off show, dwmopodcast.com. If you want to go directly to there, that's where you can vote after each season is posted. And we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. This show's probably, so yeah, that's, and then Cole, do you have a personal website?
No, not yet. John, maybe you can help me with that at some point. I don't have a personal website.
Podcast to poach clients. That'll be a great business strategy.
No, but you guys, they can find our socials at the website. Links to all of that there.
No problem. We will link all of that in the description for you. And for now, I will end this recording on a high and then watch it back immediately and make a ton of notes. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can connect again soon.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Write in the Head podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You know you want to. It's a great zero-cost way to support the mission we are on here at Write in the Head to share wellness information with the screenwriting community. If you want to go ahead and leave us a comment as well, it will please the YouTube algorithm. Therefore, this content will get shown to more screenwriters around the world. Finally, go ahead and click on the videos being suggested up here, maybe down here, depends on the end plate, and we will see you there. Wow, this is awkward.